welcome to Myth Monsters. My name is Erin and I'll be your host for these little snack bite-sized podcasts on folklore and mythical monsters from around the world. These podcasts focus on the actual cryptids, folklore and mythic monsters from global mythology, rather than focusing on the full stories of heroes and their big adventures. I'll also be dropping in some references that they have to recent culture and where you can see these represented in modern day content so that you can learn more and get as obsessed as I am about these absolute legends of the mythological and, it seems, fictional world. Happy Stranger Things Day! A secret that I think I've shared somewhere on the show before is that I was terrified to watch Stranger Things for a really long time because, just as a hint, I'm a massive wuss and it looked scary. And to be honest, there have been a few times that I have been spooked by it. But I binged it just after season 4 came out and I have been eagerly awaiting this ever since. So I hope you're looking forward to season 5 as much as I am. This isn't sponsored, by the way, I just want to make this clear. To celebrate the last season coming out today, or at least the first 4 episodes of it, I've decided to take us into the spooky Upside Down to look at a monster that terrorises this universe. Yes, we are being hunted by a Demogorgon in this special Hellfire Club special episode. Before we start, I need to clarify for my usual mythology lovers that this is a Stranger Things special episode, and that this is not going to be covering the original Demogorgon from D&D or from Greek mythology. Although I will naturally touch on them as namesakes and inspirations behind the monster. So if you were expecting a full Demogorgon, Greek myth or D&D deep dive across all of their monstrous selves, I'm afraid you may be disappointed. But you will just have to wait for another episode on them, I'm afraid. And obviously, this is the only spoiler warning I will say. If you've not watched any Stranger Things, you are going to get a spoiler here. Don't listen to this episode if you are waiting to watch any of them up to season 5, or you don't want any season 4 up to spoilers. I haven't watched any of season 5 yet, it came out today, so I'm recording this on the day, just as a sneaky little peek into my life and how monstrously chaotic it is. This is what I do. But yeah, there are going to be spoilers in this up to season 4, so that is the only warning I will give you. Move on if so. Anyway, for those who stayed, what are Demogorgons? They are typically described as humanoid monsters with slimy, pale pink and white mottled skin, elongated arms and fingers, 3-toed, almost bird-like feet, and incredibly bony bodies. Their general look is very similar to a human, although they are always naked with no visible genitalia and incredibly skin-tight and skinny to the bone. The humanoid look stops at the head though, whereas instead of a face, there is an interlocking bulb-like opening, which, when opened, is rows and rows of teeth across blood-red petals and a gaping hole of a mouth in the middle. If you've ever seen a corpse flower, they slightly resemble this in the face. If you've never seen one before, that's what they look like. They have black blood, no eyes or visible ears, but have an incredible sense of smell considering they have no face, and they are generally attracted to blood like sharks, although this does not necessarily vote you out if you don't have any blood on you. They stand bipedal at around 6 to 10 feet tall, although they have been known to run on all fours when chasing after something. An interesting twist to this monster is that they can communicate telepathically through a hive mind, and they are thought of to be controlled by one being in the place they've come from, the so-called Upside Down, an alternate darker dimension to our own, filled with these monsters and their master, Vecna. Under this hive mind are not only Demogorgons, but also their flying kin, the Demobats, the Demodogs, and the roots and vines in the environment, as well as any person possessed by the hive mind itself. How they get possessed I'll get into. There are debates that another monster in this universe, the Mind Flayer, made up of dissembled bodies, is also a part of this hive mind. However, it's also said that it has its own sentience to Vecna. It isn't quite fully explained yet. Vecna is the antagonist of this whole series, controls everything within the hive mind to seek what he wants, which is ultimate control over Earth, to transform it into his ideal upside down. I'm not going to go more into Vecna, who is also named after a D&D character. You will also have to wait for another episode on him, I'm afraid. Now, I've spoken about how these monsters come from this alternate dimension. However, they don't actually come from the Upside Down itself. They originally came from a completely different dimension known as Dimension X. However, we're not actually too sure if Dimension X is now transformed into the Upside Down, but we know this is where the Demogorgons originally came from. But how did they get here to Little Indiana in the 1980s? That is where their powers come in. Demogorgon's most immense power is dimensional teleportation. They are dimensional creatures, and the ability to open gates to other dimensions, which allows them to pop in and out of our world like nobody's business. This also messes up any energy source nearby, like lights and electricity, whilst they change over dimensions, so you can kind of tell one is coming. They are also incredibly durable, and almost invulnerable to physical damage, whilst being incredibly agile and strong. Lastly, they have a regenerative healing factor, so even if you do manage to hurt them, they will just heal anyway. They hunt in the dead of night and typically hunt people, but will also enjoy any livestock. We have seen them attack deer, for instance, which they attack with their elongated finger-like claws and finish off with a snap of their petal-like face around the head of the prey, which they can then use to rip the head off. They also typically take prey back to the Upside Down to feed on, but they also take prey back to reproduce, which is a whole other disgusting thing. Demogorgon reproduction reminds me of a scene in Harry Potter, where Ron throws up slugs, but it also reminds me of the Alien series, where they implant their eggs into the host through realistically kissing them. It's revolting. The way Demogorgons reproduce is very similar. It's through a slug, the first stage of their life cycle, being implanted into a living being to gestate. The slug is eventually born through the mouth of the person, who would usually be unconscious or in fact dead after the gestation, and it would go on and live on its own from there. There are 6 stages of Demogorgon life, the first being the larva stage or slug stage, which look like much larger, normal garden slugs. Disgusting, just on the face of it, obviously. They are the absolute worst. And if you tread on one, you will never feel like your foot is ever clean again. They are dark green with bright yellow spots, and then they evolve into the second stage, the polywog stage, which happens after an undisclosed amount of time, where they molt and grow legs like a tadpole would. They are now about the size of a human hand, and they have yellow-green skin, small claw-like hands, and a mouth and tail. They are extremely sensitive to heat and light, and will happily eat anything in order to grow, but they generally won't be outside during the day. Stage 3 is the Frogogorgon, where the skin changes to a dark green and they sprout legs and teeth, as well as getting to be the size of a large rat. Stage 4 is the Catagorgon, and this is where the petal mouth first appears, and the monster becomes carnivorous. They have a darker green skin colour and are no longer sensitive to the heat or the sun, and so can go outside. Stage 5 is the Demodog stage, Now, I mentioned these earlier, but didn't note that actually they were one of the life cycles. It is the one step down from our stage 6, the big humanoid boys, and they molt from the cat version and are about the size of a larger dog or wolf. They are incredibly strong, able to dig massive tunnels, and also climb tall mountains and structures. They are not quite invulnerable yet, but their skin has thickened to repel such things as gunshots and is this horrible pale green colour. They typically hunt in packs with others, which the humanoid version does not do. They are very solo, and they tend to drag things back to the Upside Down to eat. They will not eat it in place. Then we are back to our humanoid, flower-headed pals in stage 6, who are murderous, violent, and a bit mind-control dumb. But I've not told you how to kill these yet, have I? So let's talk death. You could harm these considerably by utilising their slight weakness to fire, which does still burn them. And of course, you can just still whack them, but there's no guarantee they're not getting straight back up and brushing it off and then finishing you off. The best way to kill them is to use their telepathic link against them by having telepathic powers yourself. Oh, you don't have those. What a shame. But it's okay, you could also just chop off their head with a big sword at the neck. That'll do it, but good luck with that, mate. Now, moving on to etymology. As I said, Demogorgon is taken from a Greek mythological monster, but also not really. Demogorgons in Greek myth were considered a deity or demon associated with the underworld. However, it is quite loose, and sometimes they were a specific named demonic king. However, the word Demogorgon is still Greek, coming from a misinterpretation of the language back in the day from the word demiurge, which means creator being. However, if we're staying in the universe, it's linked to a D&D character with the same name, who was also a demon lord. There is also obviously a link with two words that make up this word here, demo and gorgon, a link to demons and gorgons, the latter also being a creature from Greek myth. However, it is just more a link to the D&D monster, so that one is just an obvious point out from my perspective. For their history, we only know about these monsters from their first appearance in 1983, when a Stage 6 Demogorgon entered Hawkins in Indiana in the US. It was killed, but it did spread some damage to the earth, including kidnapping a child. In 1984, the same child became possessed and unleashed a bunch of Demogorgons into Hawkins, which were all eventually killed by the heroic team we know from the show. In 1985, the Soviet Union created a technology to get into the Upside Down and created a huge portal to gather specimens of demo dogs to aid in the Cold War. However, one of these did mature into a Demogorgon, which they kept in their prisoner of war camp in Kamchatka, which eventually was also killed by one of our heroes. The portal brought forth the Mind Flayer, which possessed a bunch of people in Hawkins and threatened total destruction before being destroyed. Lastly, to what we know at least, Vecna is still plotting our demise with the help of his Demogorgon friends in the Upside Down, and we're waiting to see what happens next in his dastardly plan. I've made him sound like a camp panto villain, where he's probably one of the most evil characters ever written into any kind of fiction. So, let's just see what happens, shall we? Now, let's take us out of all of this. I really enjoy this show. Let's come out the fantasy and let's talk show making and the inspiration and creation of this beast. Stranger Things is finishing up with its last season all wrapped up before 2026, but has been running since 2016 and has an immense cult following known as the Hellfire Club from the D&D Club in the 4th season, R.I.P. Eddie Munson. You would have loved Baldur's Gate 3 and you truly were my dream man. The Duffer Brothers, who wrote Stranger Things, wanted to use practical effects in making a proper horror monster. And it was partially motion capture, and then from season 2 onwards was CGI to create the Demogorgon. The motion capture involved a full-size form that the body of the Demogorgon was actually sculpted into. Animatronics were installed in the head and arms, which had to be operated with a remote control, and the actor, Mark Steger, often had to wear metal stilts to make him 10 inches taller. It actually only took half an hour to 40 minutes to put the whole thing on, and it only weighed around 30 pounds. The animatronic head that you had to wear, though, had 26 motors in, and the head petals would all move uniquely every time it opened. However, it was so loud that Steger could not hear directions and was ultimately changed to full CGI in the next season, and that is what we have seen going on from season 2. Demogorgons were heavily inspired by horror monsters, by the works of Guillermo del Toro, H.R. Giger, Clive Barker and Masahiro Ito, and were ultimately inspired to go with the humanoid creature with no face, just a mouth, but also by nature, which gave them their flower-like head. But they were often linked to mushrooms behind the scenes, and throughout shots of the Upside Down in the show, you can see this lichen-like substance everywhere, and spores actually in the air. You might be naturally thinking of The Last of Us, and you can totally see those comparisons. Now, I understand that's kind of a weird history section, but before the 5th season finishes up, there's a few questions in their backstory that I don't have the answers to right now, and I hope we do get everything answered as the show comes to a close, but I guess that's all we've got on them, really. As I said though, Stranger Things has a massive cult following, and is one of Netflix's biggest shows ever, with spin-offs such as the comic books, the novels, other shows, and even a West End play that's just transferred to Broadway. I would also not be surprised if something else follows the end of the show, and the spin-off that has been planned for next year. Now, just to finish up our usual kind of structure, we don't have any real-life comparisons really to link this to. There's really not anything in reality that are like these. There are, of course, links to things in the physical world, like corpse flowers for instance, but I'm sorry to say that there's really not much of this kind of being around. For mythical comparisons, to be honest, there's not much here either, other than the actual Demogorgon, and that is just based on the name. I will cover the actual Demogorgon another time. I just don't want to muddy the water and intertwine these two in one episode, and then confuse the two of them as they're starkly different and well worth their own episode as a D&D specific monster to cover, alongside Mind Flayers and Vecna himself at some point. And as a big D&D fan and Baldur's Gate fan, as you all must know about me, I really look forward to doing D&D monsters, so they will be something I touch on at another time. Now, you might be thinking, Erin, you can't possibly cover modern media for this. But you're wrong. There's a whole load of stuff that isn't Stranger Things that has these monsters in. I mean, don't get me wrong, there's a lot of stuff that is Stranger Things, but just listen. Art is probably the biggest category here, but there's nothing official and nothing specific I can give you. So my recommendation is to look at independent art that you can find on DeviantArt and places like that for some incredible modern artistry, modern spins on these, and I say modern within the last 10 years modern, but there are some really cool bits about these monsters out there, and all of the stuff within Stranger Things. Now, we don't have any movies, but we do have a stage play. Stranger Things The First Shadow premiered here in the West End in 2023, and is now on Broadway as of 2025. This is all prequel stuff, and I've not seen it, so I don't know much about it. Purposefully, I don't want to spoil it for myself either, but I have heard it's incredible, and the special effects are insane, and you can watch the making of Stranger Things, The First Shadow, on Netflix to see the behind the scenes of the show. But obviously, it's going to spoil the whole show for you, most likely, and it will spoil all the special effects. So probably don't watch it until you've seen the actual show. But you've now got the opportunity if you live in the UK or in Europe and can get to London, or if you live in the US and can get to New York for Broadway. For TV, we have Stranger Things, The Simpsons, and Sesame Street, which have also both covered Stranger Things in their show. There's also a spin-off show in the works happening next year called Stranger Things Tales from 85. So keep an eye out for that too if you're a fan and want to keep consuming content from this world. In video games, we have a bunch, but it's going to sound really repetitive to begin with. Stranger Things the game, Stranger Things VR, Stranger Things 3 the game, Stranger Things Puzzle Tales, Stranger Things the VR experience, then Fortnite, Smite, Roblox, The 7 Deadly Sins Grand Cross, The Vanishing, and Dead by Daylight. Devastatingly, as a side note, there was a Telltale Stranger Things game in the works, which would have been amazing, and I've mentioned so many times on the show how much I love the Telltale games, but it was cancelled when the studio went under in 2018. Boo. But maybe they'll pick it back up now they're kind of back. I mean, they're working on Wolf Among Us 2, which I'll take that over anything. My book recommendation this week is to have a look at the Stranger Things comic books, or the book series. I won't name them all here because we'd be here all day, but you can have a look at them by searching Stranger Things novels or Stranger Things comic books, and there's a list of them on the wiki if you just want a combined list of every single title. Now, if you're into the movie magic part of monsters like this, have a look at Making Monsters, Inside Stories from the creators of Hollywood's most iconic creatures by Howard Berger and Marshall Julius, or their other book, Masters of Makeup Effects, A Century of Practical Magic, on more makeup and special effects within films. But now it's time for Do I Think They Existed? Lol, of course not. Folks, if you do, you need to literally go and touch some grass. And I hate to use that saying, I really do, but this one's a bit psychopathic. Yes, they are freaky, and yes, they may show up as your sleep paralysis demon or nightmare, but are they real? Definitely not. But they are still scary, and that is okay. They're just not real, folks. We know these are fictional, so this episode's Do We Think They Exist is pretty easy. But that's not to say that if they did, I wouldn't be a nervous wreck all the time, because I'm certainly not going to go and decapitate anything to stop it from killing me. I would just be victim numero uno. I will take this time instead to say that I think they're a very cool monster, and I think they're super unique, and what I love about Stranger Things is that they lean into that D&D culture and history, which was massively a point of last season, so I hope it continues into this one for the very last time. I will also say that although I loved last season, and especially Eddie, #Dreamboat, my absolute favourite was season 3. And I thought the Mind Flayer storyline was phenomenal, and also I think Billy was also #Dreamboat, even though he was a little bit of a butt throughout up until the end. Fun anecdote, my cousin also recently watched the show for the first time, and due to my glasses and ginger hair, I have been called Barb ever since, mainly for the last 3 months or so. And you know what? I'll take it, because justice for Barb. It's got to be done. But anyway, Demogorgons, alongside most creatures in this franchise, have been really well designed, and are definitely the perfect monsters for the storyline and for our nightmares. I really do hope there are some decent spin-offs beside the play where we can see these again someday. And I'm very excited to see the play. But what do you think? Did the Demogorgons roam the earth and look into dragging us into the Upside Down? You're insane if you think so, But do let me know on social media, I would love to know what you think. What a fun little special this week. I really hope you enjoyed it, and even if you're not a Stranger Things mega fan, and thank you so much for still listening if you did, I hope you enjoyed it too, and at least it was informative, or maybe pushed you towards watching it and giving in to the hype, because truly it is very good. I would say otherwise if it wasn't. This episode is part of the daily releases I've been doing this week throughout November, and it wasn't planned long before because obviously we didn't have a release date for a little while, so I will just repeat what I said a few days ago in terms of what's coming next. Next time, we are heading over to a belief system rather than a place and looking at a creature from Hindu mythology, one of the stunning forms of Lord Shiva. Be prepared to gawk in awe of the majestic Sharabha next time on the show, which, if you're listening in real time, will be tomorrow. How exciting! For now, thank you so much for listening. It's been an absolute pleasure. If you enjoyed this podcast, please give it a rating on the service you are listening on. I've got loads of social media for any questions or suggestions on what monsters to cover next, and I'd really love to hear from you. The social media handles for TikTok, YouTube and Instagram are Myth Monsters Podcast. The Twitter is Myth Monsters Pod, and Blue Sky is Myth Monsters. But all of our content can be found at mythmonsters.co.uk, and you can find us on Good Pods, Buy Me a Coffee and Patreon if you want to help me fund the podcast too. Come join the fun, share this with your pals, they might love me as much as you do. But for now, stay spooky, stay out of the upside down, and I'll see you later, babes.